So I'll just say I'm welcoming everyone. I was asked to make a few opening welcoming remarks tonight. It's a pleasure to be here. And in case you don't know, the applause suggests some of you do know, but Bettina Aptaker and I teach in the Feminist Studies department. So thank you very much. Karen Thompson is an extraordinary figure in the history of the struggle for lesbian and gay rights. And this evening is an extraordinary opportunity for us to hear her. I would like to very briefly say a few things about this history from my personal life, so that as Karen speaks tonight, you will perhaps better appreciate the personal impact, the emotional impact of the kind of work she has done. I was raised in New York in the 1950s, and I have many personal and terrifying memories of the persecutions, arrests, harassments, and humiliations to which LGBT folks were subjected. Although I suspected that I was a lesbian from a young age, I was terrified of the word and the association. I was also under constant FBI surveillance and police surveillance, both because of my parentage and then later because of my political affiliations. And it went from childhood through the 1960s and 70s. Probably longer than that, but I don't have my FBI record to tell you that. I don't know. I was brutalized by the police and the FBI after they discovered evidence of a lesbian affair in which I was involved. I suffered from both paranoia and depression. I married at the very young age of 21, I think at least in part to escape from my more compelling desires to be with women. I married a very decent and humane man who shared my radical politics, and we had a mutual vision for social justice. We had 2 beautiful children, and of course, the potential loss of them raised the stakes for my staying as deeply closeted as possible. I don't think my story is particularly unique. I rehearse this personal history only to say to you that the cultural shift which is taking place in this country and in many parts of the world, allowing for the humanity, dignity, civil and human rights of LGBT people is truly astonishing to me. If you had told me in the 1960s, even in the midst of all the political ferment of which I was a part, that such a thing would happen within my lifetime, I would have told you were nuts. When I met my life partner in 1979, I had finally left my marriage a year earlier, but I was still deeply closeted. On the other hand, she was fearless and joyful. Our children held us both in their love, even if in the midst of their childhoods in the 1970s, they worried about how their peers would treat them when they discovered that their parents were lesbians. In fall 1983, I came out to my students quite spontaneously during a lecture. I am sure I startled them, but I startled myself even more. And they were so sweet and loving and embraced me with so much kindness. When I came out to my mother that same year with my heart pounding, she hugged me and told me she had known since I was 16. I said, "Mama, why didn't you tell me?" And she said, "Well, I had hoped for the best," which to her meant a conventional marriage and grandchildren. All of this is to say that my journey towards internal healing happened in those years as I felt safe enough and loved enough to come out. I am so deeply and profoundly grateful that I had the opportunity, because I know that for so many of my generation it was not possible. So many of us sustained such deep woundings. I also know that many young people today, even here in Santa Cruz as well as elsewhere in the country, are bullied and brutalized and disowned by their families because of their queer identity. In such a context of personal and political struggle, it was an extraordinary moment to witness the President of the United States endorsing gay rights during and marriage in his inaugural address. And there was a description of a gay man standing listening to the address in the crowd, weeping. And I totally understood that. I totally understood where he was coming from. A lot of younger people today don't understand how this was and how far we've come. So welcoming you to this evening's event is a pleasure. I want to thank our sponsoring organizations, including the Feminist Studies Department the UC Presidential Chair in Feminist Critical Race and Ethnic Studies, the Institute for Humanities Research, UCSC's Cantu Queer Center, Women Lawyers of Santa Cruz, and the Santa Cruz Diversity Center. Thank you for your support in making this possible. It's now my great pleasure to introduce to you Professor Kelly Weisberg, who will introduce our guest. Kelly Weisberg is professor of law at the University of California, Hastings College of Law. She's a leading authority in the fields of family law, domestic violence, children in the law, and feminist legal theory. Her most recent book is Domestic Violence, Legal and Social Reality, published in 2012. Her classic co-authored text, Modern Family Law, Cases and Materials, is about to be released in its 5th edition. Professor Kelly is also the wife of our UC Chancellor, George Blumenthal. She arranged for this visit by Karen Thompson, both at Hastings College of Law and here at UCSC. Please welcome Professor Kelly Weisberg.
Good evening. Tonight, we are gathered to hear from a pioneer in the gay rights movement, a monumental figure who changed the legal landscape. Karen Thompson has long been one of my heroes. I've taught her case to generations of law students. She's been one of my heroes because she fought such a long, hard battle against discrimination and injustice. Her story and that of her partner, Sharon Kowalski, that we'll hear about tonight, reveals the difference that one courageous and determined woman can make. The story of Karen Thompson and Sharon Kowalski is a legend in 2 social movements, the gay rights movement and the disability rights movement. But their case is so much more. It transcends these boundaries. Let me explain, from my perspective as a family law professor, why Karen and Sharon's case is such a landmark and why it transcends legal boundaries. The basic facts are well known. Karen Thompson gained national recognition following the 1983 car accident in which her partner, Sharon Kowalski, sustained a brain injury after being hit by a drunk driver. Following the accident, Karen fought a decade-long battle to gain the right to care for her disabled partner. In her battle, Karen stood up for what she believed was right, the right simply to be with her partner and to care for her partner. And in so doing, she fought a tremendous battle. She faced overwhelming opposition from 3 major forces: the medical establishment, the legal establishment, and sadly, most sadly of all, her partner's biological family members. Karen's case took place at a critical stage in the gay rights movement. It was the dawn of the marriage equality movement. The marriage equality movement actually began the decade before their case, in the early 1970s, with 3 legal cases in Minnesota, Kentucky, and Washington State. In each case, same-sex couples unsuccessfully raised constitutional arguments that in recent history have been successful in the state level. But in those cases, there was no hope. In the early years, the marriage equality movement floundered badly. Early courts ignored the legal issues, were dismissive. In one case, the judge said, "I don't see any constitutional issues here." Another case, the judge was looking for precedent. Well, there was no precedent for determinations of same-sex marriage. And the law, as you know, always looks for precedent. So the judge came up with one. He quoted the esteemed legal treatise known as Webster's Dictionary and said, "We know what marriage is. Webster defines it: 1 man, 1 woman." And if that wasn't good enough, he brought in 2 more dictionaries that said the same thing. Well, nothing happened in the marriage equality movement from the 1970s until the 1990s. It was only in 1993 that we had the first successful case in Hawaii. That case didn't guarantee the right to same-sex marriage, but it started a significant movement on the federal and state level that ultimately did result in same-sex marriage in Massachusetts. But between the 1970s and the 1990s, there was a curious and complete silence in terms of the marriage equality movement. What explains the resurgence of activity in the 1990s? What explains that ultimately the success of that movement in the 1990s? What changed the tide? I think the answer is clear, and I think the answer is Sharon Kowalski's case that turned the tide of public opinion. Karen Thompson brought a message to the American public, and that message was the harm of discrimination. Her book, Why Can't Sharon Kowalski Come Home?, was a rallying cry for the gay rights movement. But Karen and Sharon's story resonated with the American public, not so much because it was a story of gay rights, but because it was a story of universal truths. It was a story about the pain of being separated from a loved one. It was a story about the pain of not being able to care for someone you love, who needs you and who wants you. It was about the anguish of people wronged by the legal system and the medical system. Karen and Sharon's story is a story of love, of commitment, of caring, of courage, and of persistence in the face of tremendous adversity. And it's a story that Karen is going to tell us about tonight. We are so privileged that Karen Thompson is here with us. Karen is a professor in the Human Relations Department at St. Cloud State University in St. Cloud, Minnesota. She's been widely recognized in a leadership role for over 30 years. She has received numerous awards from Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund, the National Organization for Women, the Feminist Majority Foundation, the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, and many others. She's been the spokesperson for gay rights and disability rights on the state and federal levels. She has made countless media appearances, including The Phil Donahue Show, West 57th, and CBS This Morning. And as I mentioned, she's the author of a famous book, Why Can't Sharon Kowalski Come Home? I guarantee her story will touch your hearts. It's a story of the power of courage and the power of love. It is my honor and my privilege to present to you Karen Thompson.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for coming this evening. A singer-songwriter friend of mine sings a song, Love is a Dangerous Promise. The first verse goes, you and I have spent many hours with never a thought of time. We were working and laughing and watching the world, nothing much else on our minds. But every so often we'd stop and look in each other's eyes, and out of the silence would come the questions, the secret fears in our lives. Will you be there for me when I really need someone to hold me? And will you care for me? These are the words you told me. I'll be there. I'll be there for you when you really need someone to hold you. I'll be there. Yes, love is a dangerous promise, but I'll be there. Little did I know just how dangerous a promise love would be. Walk with me for a moment in time. In 1979, Sharon Kowalski and I fell in love. We made a commitment to be there with each other for the rest of our lives. We exchanged rings. We bought a house together. We shared hopes and dreams similar to any other couple. We lived in a committed relationship for 4 years. We considered ourselves married. We were extremely closeted. We believed that as long as we kept our personal lives private, separate from our professional lives, we'd be safe. And I hope some of you understand from where I've come. As the journey began, I was a naive, reserved, apolitical, conservative Republican. I can help you understand just how naive I was with one statement. I voted for Ronald Reagan. Not just once, but twice. How much better the system works if we support the very people who are against all of our rights. Okay? I went from voting for him that last time to thinking he should have been impeached in the course of that 4 years. So I certainly share my voting record with you, not because I'm proud of it, but I want to give you hope that people can change. What we've learned was as long as we are invisible, we're vulnerable. Audre Lorde said, "Our silence does not protect us." And I had no idea what she meant when I first heard that. But only when people hear our stories and experience our pain can they begin to understand why we need to pass legislation to protect our rights. Rights we should already have, but that we lose so readily. That we don't want special rights, we want equal rights. I need to find a place to put these papers here without them falling all over the floor. Too many cords up here. Okay. On Sunday, November 13th, 1983, Sharon looked at me and said, "Save Monday night for me, Karen. We haven't had much time together this weekend." And for us, Monday night never came, as Sharon was hit by a drunk driver later that afternoon and sustained a traumatic brain injury. She would be considered in a coma for the next few months, and as she came out of that coma, she didn't speak. She had severe short-term memory deficit. Her long-term memory was completely intact. She could remember things from before the accident, but she lives in this moment right now. If she'd be here today, she could understand what I'm saying and would leave the room and she'd forget she's been here. All right, that's short-term memory deficit. She had quadriparesis. All 4 limbs are affected. She's not a quadriplegic. It's a brainstem injury, a closed head injury. She has feeling everywhere. She simply can't get the appropriate message to the appropriate part of her body to make it move. She uses a wheelchair. So she's a very different person than she was prior to the accident. But difference doesn't mean she's less than. You can't compare this Sharon with the old Sharon. Our lives as we knew them were shattered due to the inability to legally sanction our relationships, no legal recognition of our families, no partnership benefits, little or no protection of our basic human rights. Nightmares like Sharon's and mine can occur. I arrived at the hospital and spent close to 3 hours trying to find out if Sharon was dead or alive. And no one would talk with me because I wasn't family. If we'd been married, I would have had immediate access to Sharon and immediate input into her care. Since Sharon was single, Sharon's parents were given the authority to act as her guardian. They didn't think friends should visit as often as I was visiting. I was taken out of Sharon's room and told no one could love Sharon like family loved Sharon, that family could meet all of her needs. If I didn't stop visiting so often, they'd see to it I couldn't visit at all. And they started to make plans to move Sharon out of the St. Cloud area where she'd lived the last 6 years of her adult life. And they wanted to move her to a nursing home in Hibbing, Minnesota, 3 hours from our home, closer to their home for their convenience of visiting. So could they move her from a hospital with a rehab facility to a place with none? Could they separate us? I was spending hours a day talking with Sharon, playing music for Sharon, stretching out her hands, fingers, legs, feet, toes, in hope that she'd regain use of some parts of her body. We were making progress. I made a videotape of Sharon. I wanted her to see the progress that she was making. All right? I asked her things like, "Which ball would you like, Sharon?" She reached up and took a ping pong ball. "Touch your chin with it, Sharon. Take it to your hip, Sharon. Drop the ball in my hand, Sharon." We did word association. I'd show her a picture and she could point to the appropriate word, which is really difficult to make that association with the type of brain injury that she has. On that videotape, you could see Sharon learning to wash her face. You could see her learning to brush her teeth. You could see her learning to comb her hair. I also made the videotape because I wanted to prove to the medical personnel that Sharon was understanding and Sharon was responding. And they were trying to tell me that you can imagine movement if you want to badly enough. So Sharon, of course, wouldn't cooperate and do any of these things when they were in the room with me. So anyway, I made the videotape to prove what Sharon was doing. In order to protect Sharon's and my rights as a couple, what a joke, we had none. And Sharon's right then to the best possible medical care, to live where she wanted to live as an adult, to see the people she wished to see, I entered into a guardianship struggle with Sharon's family. I never wanted to enter into that struggle. I've never been a threat to her parents. We should not have to choose between biological family and chosen family. I really believed the guardianship statute would protect us. It asked, who's the best qualified? I knew I could prove I was the best qualified. What would Sharon want? Keep her in the most normal situations possible. Of course she'd want to live where she'd lived prior to the accident, with the same person she was living with, rather than in a nursing home. I was stunned by the July 1985 court decision. It ruled that the ongoing struggle between Sharon's family and myself was detrimental to Sharon, and gave full power and full guardianship to Sharon's father to remove the conflict. The irony was I was doing everything possible to remove the conflict. I had asked the judge to require counseling, and the judge says you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink it. We tried mediation, my minister through their priest, and they had refused. PFLAG has written Sharon's parents the neatest letter, saying, we understand your pain, your anger. Could we please sit down with you sometime and talk with you? Their attorney responded, I merely ask you to mind your own business, quit harassing my clients, or we'll take legal action. The judge ruled this poor disabled girl needs the unconditional love of her father. The court gave full power to the father, who said over and over again he would never believe I was a loved one of Sharon's, and that he would do everything in his power to separate us. Within 24 hours of that court order, he ordered I should never be allowed to see Sharon again. All of Sharon's friends and support system went, from 6 years of her life prior to the accident, went down with me, guilty by association. The Minnesota Civil Liberties Union, who became involved in the case by that time, was no longer allowed in to see Sharon. Disability rights groups who become involved in the case were no longer allowed to see Sharon. Only people on a visitation list approved by her father for the next 3.5 years would be allowed to get in to see Sharon. Within 48 hours of the court order, he moved her to the nursing home in Hibbing that over a year before the court ruled did not have the appropriate facilities for Sharon. And the question I was to ask for the next 9.5 years was, why can't Sharon Kowalski come home? My perception of reality has been shattered. The world as I believed it to be simply did not exist. As the journey began, I believed all the ideals I had been taught this country stood for. I believed in truth and justice, that the law would protect us. I've had a crash course in understanding our rich, white, heterosexual, non-disabled, Christian, male system. And I'm not here to attack any of the groups that those adjectives describe, but I do want people to understand some people have more privilege within the system than others. If we're white, we have an incredible amount of privilege, just certified by birth. If you're male, you have an incredible amount of privilege, and so on and so forth. So yes, I've learned about that system. And I've learned how Sharon can be oppressed, and I can be oppressed because we're women. All right? I really believed I was the best qualified to be Sharon's guardian, and I could prove it. I had a course in physical therapy, a course in occupational therapy. I worked an internship at Chillicothe Veterans Hospital in Ohio. I certainly knew and understood passive range of motion, as I've been a coach for years and a physical education teacher. In my PhD work, when I was working on that, I specialized in motivation for learning. How can we motivate someone to want to learn? And the name of the game with the type of brain injury Sharon has is to try to stimulate her to go over the same small tasks hundreds and hundreds of times. I've been specially prepared to work with someone like Sharon, but I couldn't prove it in the court. And I always risk classism, and I don't mean to, but compare my qualifications to her father, who had a 6th grade education and worked his life in the mines. I was clearly better qualified, and there was no way I could come up against the power and the control that the father has in the nuclear family. So they just discounted everything that all my qualifications. The judge ruled this poor disabled girl needs the unconditional love of her father. There's no way I could prove I was better qualified. Sharon obviously needed a man to make all decisions for her, to look after her, to shelter her, to protect her. Sharon could type out by that time what she wanted, but she was totally ignored. I don't know why I was surprised. We've ignored what women have had to say for centuries. If Sharon had been a man, I think she would have received better care, because we encourage men to be everything they can be in our society. And yet again, we just need to take care of women. One of our St. Cloud State University administrators was on an airplane with several high-ranking officials in our state government, including our governor. He later told me that the consensus opinion on that airplane was, that bitch will never gain guardianship. The sister of one of the Minnesota appellate court judges tried to talk with him about the case, and he responded to her, how dare that woman think she knows better than us what's best for Sharon Kowalski. The first probate court judge, Campbell, told a TV producer that he thought he was doing me a favor. I could get on with my life, The father would always be her father. We ran head-on into the old boys club as Jack Fina, the parents' attorney, could pick up the telephone, call his golfing buddy, Chief Justice Popovich of the appellate court at the time, and he took a verbal motion, even though the law says they must all be written. They canceled depositions in progress immediately, denying us due process of law, denying us the right to even respond and have 5 days to do that. But yeah, he could do that on a weekend. My attorney, of course, a woman, couldn't even find the judge on a weekend. I've learned how Sharon can be oppressed because she has a disability and the ableism that we ran into. People would come in the room and ask me, when I was still able to see Sharon, how's Sharon feeling? You know, people who are different have told me how they're invisible or how people look right through them and can't really see them. I didn't understand that. On one occasion, I asked the Minnesota Civil Liberties Union attorney, ask Sharon how she's feeling. She's right here. And when Sharon was asked, she typed out, shitty. I'd feel kind of shitty, too, if people talked about me and talked about my future like I wasn't even there. Or people would come in the room and yell at Sharon as if she couldn't hear just because she communicated differently. And, of course, if she couldn't hear, yelling wouldn't help. So we might as well talk in the same tone of voice. Or that baby talk. How are we doing today, Sharon? And I don't blame Sharon for turning away and responding and not responding. Or we had a judge actually saying she couldn't be in the courtroom because of her physical condition, when she could get anywhere you push a wheelchair. They said she couldn't understand, couldn't communicate in any way, in spite of all the well-documented evidence to the contrary. A disability rights group had asked Sharon, what did you do prior to the accident? She typed teach. What did you teach? She typed PE, health. What kind of a car did you drive? She typed Toyota. Did you coach? Yes. What sports? She typed basketball, track. What's your favorite flower? She typed columbine. I'd have picked a shorter word, rose or something, if I couldn't understand or communicate. But columbine, how could they say she couldn't understand? Or the Minnesota Civil Liberties Union had multiple conversations with Sharon, asking her things like, what are you and Karen? And she typed gay. Sharon's father said on the stand for her to ever use that word probably means she's having a gay time. She's like a child now. She doesn't understand what that means. And yet when she was asked, Sharon typed out to love someone of the same sex. Keep in mind, the judge ruled she can understand nothing, nor can she communicate in any way. Or her father said that to take Sharon out in public, to take her outside of the nursing home, would be an embarrassment. I always wondered to whom. Sharon types out she wanted to go to basketball games, she wanted to go out and do these things, but to Sharon? Obviously not. But to her parents, to society, who'd rather keep people with disabilities out of sight, out of mind. I actually have a newspaper article, a couple of them, from what the parents had to say. Donald says, her father, hell, who knows what's going on in that shell? She can't express herself. She can't explain. Or in another one, he says, short of a miracle, his daughter's a helpless victim who will require institutionalization for the rest of her life and would need him to make all of her decisions for the rest of his. He goes on and says, I think she's Thompson, an animal. As far as I'm concerned, they should have locked her up a long time ago. And then it did show an example of Sharon's typing. Are you gay? Slowly typing with one finger. She typed out yes. Do you have a lover? If yes, what's the person's name? She answered Karen T. Nevertheless, Donald Kowalski said he'll never believe she's a lesbian unless she tells him. I don't know what he thought she was doing. But anyway, on the farm and in the army, he says we call them queers and fruits, not lesbians and gays. And what the hell difference does it make if she's lesbian, gay, straight, or anything, because she's just laying there in diapers? Let the poor kid rest in peace. Keep in mind the judge found this guy best qualified to be her guardian. How frightening. Okay, and I lost my sheet. Okay, I've also learned how Sharon and I can be oppressed because we're lesbians. Medical personnel in the beginning didn't want to get involved, didn't want to take sides. I never asked them to. I only asked them to say what they would say, document the truth about what they observed on Sharon's behalf. We went from there to a doctor who actually did take the stand and said, I've prayed about this, I've agonized over it, before he could say that Karen Thompson functions as an effective therapist for Sharon Kowalski, and he is a neurologist who would do nothing to separate us. Dr. William Wilson, one of the doctors, wrote a doctor's order stating I should never be allowed to see Sharon again because he understood there might have been a prior sexual relationship. And based on that, he feared sexual abuse. The Professional Ethics Responsibility Board for Attorneys, when we filed a complaint saying that the parent's attorney was representing both them and also Sharon in the case against the drunk driver, and there was an obvious conflict, said there may or may not be a conflict of interest here. We're sick and tired of these wacko relationships between people like Karen Thompson and this poor disabled girl. Or Jack Fina, the parent's attorney, stood in the courtroom with his hand raised and a Bible in it, saying to test Sharon for competency would cost her hundreds of thousands of dollars in the personal injury suit case, because if they could argue that she would get married and have children, she'd be worth more money than a lesbian. Or when I finally regained visitation rights with Sharon, I was allowed to take her out of the institution on a pass. The judge required that I have a staff escort because he feared sexual abuse on the outings. The court went from fearing sexual abuse if Sharon came home to live with me to saying it would be infidelity or adultery should I ever be involved in a relationship with somebody else. It's like, wow, I can't win. The Hennepin County Court judge actually gave me a lecture at the end of one of the hearings. He says, because you do know it says here in the Bible this is a sin. We were just flabbergasted. The isms simply aren't rational. I've learned how society's sexism, ableism, homophobia, heterosexism can result in the loss of basic human rights. For 3.5 years, we were separated. I lived with the memory of that July day before we were separated and the desperation in Sharon's words as she typed out, "Help me, get me out of here." I tried to reassure Sharon that I would do everything possible to get her out of there, that my visitation time was up and I had to go home. And she typed, "Take me home with you." And I'll never forget, I was haunted daily by the love and the trust in Sharon's eyes that I'd make that happen. And I couldn't make it happen. Over the course of our long separation, I continued to battle in the courts to get Sharon proper rehabilitation, proper care. I knew that with every defeat, with every appeal that was denied, that every time a state statute was removed for our case, it cost Sharon quality of life for a lifetime. As we had that readiness for learning, as those brain cells became ready to be retrained, Sharon didn't get the rehabilitation she needed to make that happen. And we lost some opportunities forever when that happened. I lived from one court hearing to the next, always believing that the next time things would be different. They never were. I cried myself to sleep night after night, only to be awakened by nightmares about what was happening to Sharon. Many times I just wished I wouldn't wake up the next morning. But I was Sharon's only hope. Somehow I had to survive. We have a state statute that stays orders being appealed until the appeal is heard. I should have been able to visit Sharon the entire time the court order was under appeal. 2 of the 3 judges on the appellate court voted to remove the statute for us. The 3rd judge dissented, saying it's a blatant violation of the Minnesota state statute staying orders until the appeal is heard. By luck of the draw, we got the 2 judges who constantly ruled against us in every appeal after appeal after appeal. And I have no idea statistically how that could happen, as I taught test and measurements, and I couldn't figure it out. It took us 5 years to get Sharon tested for competency, which required by law is every 6 months to a year. When Sharon went into that coma, she lost all of her basic human rights, but she came out of the coma. Why couldn't we get her tested for competency? If she's competent, wouldn't most people be glad? If she's incompetent, what harm would be done? A disability rights group testified in court that they had a typed conversation with Sharon, as I told you before, and yet again, the judge ruled she couldn't understand or communicate. He even denied her the right to be in the courtroom because of her medical condition. Sharon should have been allowed to be there while her future was being determined. The Minnesota Civil Liberties Union wanted to represent Sharon, tried to get standing in the case. The judge said since Sharon was incompetent, she did not have the right to hire counsel of choice. They went all the way to the United States Supreme Court asking the question, shouldn't the rights of a person with a disability be at least as vigorously protected as those of a convicted criminal? That convicted criminals have more rights than Sharon Kowalski. And they never did get standing in our case. We lost our First Amendment rights, freedom of association, as we were separated for over 3.5 years. And again, I lived with that look on Sharon's face as she wanted me to get her out of there. Over the course of our long separation, I continued to battle in the courts to get Sharon proper care. And I just couldn't seem to get them to care about that either. I was devastated by Sharon's response to a friend when we snuck in to see her when she was asked if she knew why I wasn't there, and she typed out no. And when it was explained to her, she typed, "I thought she left me." Had we not been excluded from marriage, I could have been there for Sharon. I was doing everything humanly possible to break our case open, and I still felt as though I had failed Sharon. The Office of Health Facility Complaints investigated a violation of Sharon's Patient Bill of Rights. Sharon indicated to them who she'd like to see. They found the nursing home to be in violation, gave them 5 days to become in compliance with the law. Our courts in Minnesota removed the Patient Bill of Rights, saying that the Patient Bill of Rights only imposes duties on institutions, not on the guardian. And since the institution must go by the wishes of the guardian can remove the Patient Bill of Rights. How frightening. We filed through the Vulnerable Adult Protection Act that Sharon was not receiving proper care. It was found that she was receiving the level of care ordered by her doctor. Therefore, the nursing home couldn't be found in violation. Of course, we're talking about Dr. William Wilson, who feared sexual abuse, okay? And he also said that to give Sharon occupational therapy is a complete waste of time because there's no way she'd ever hold down an occupation. That's not the purpose of occupational therapy. We filed, as I said, the conflict of interest, and again, we couldn't prove, they wouldn't actually investigate that. There are many other statutes that were ignored or changed as the guardians continued to violate Sharon's rights, and the Minnesota courts upheld the guardian's rights. But most importantly at all, Sharon lost the right to recovery. I got ahead of myself here somehow. Yeah, I'd swallowed the control which taught me that activist, feminist were negative words. I now understand if I don't stand up for somebody else's rights that are being violated today, that tomorrow Sharon and I could lose our rights. I've learned no matter how much I believe in somebody else's rights, if I do nothing, I'm helping to participate in their oppression and even my own oppression. That neutrality in the face of oppression only aids the oppressor. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, to ignore evil is to become an accomplice to it. I just didn't understand that you cannot stay silent in the face of oppression without actually helping to maintain a status quo that's extremely oppressive. Sharon was finally tested for competency in September of 1988, a mere 5 years after the accident. The testing proved Sharon could understand, could communicate, make many of her basic life choices, and was not getting appropriate care. As a result, she was moved to a different institution in January of '89 to receive rehabilitation. Once there, the medical teams requested that Sharon be allowed to see the visitors she wished to see, and my visitation rights were reestablished in February of 1989. I cannot begin to express how devastating it was to see how much ground Sharon had lost. My nightmares became reality. I could stand Sharon up with a transfer belt. She could bear weight with support. I'd rock her back and forth and tell her we were dancing, and she could catch her balance with her right foot. I thought she might walk with a walker someday. I could move her from the bed to a chair, or from the chair to a wheelchair, from the wheelchair to the front seat of my car. All right? When I got back in to see Sharon, her legs were so contracted you couldn't stretch them past a 90-degree angle. Her feet from foot drop were arched backwards. Her toes were curled up completely up underneath the bottoms of her feet, but somehow this was a gay rights issue. All right? Took major surgery to cut the adductor muscles in her thighs, the tendons behind her knees, reconstruct her ankles, her feet, and her toes, just so we could wash her better, dress her, so she could sit in a wheelchair in a better position. Her left arm had become like part of her body. And again, we had to cut muscles and tendons just to get her arm away from her body because of all those contractures. And the press kept printing, St. Cloud Times, lesbian bitter over outcome of case. All right, instead of saying woman with a disability denied the right to be tested for competency, denied her patient bill of rights, denied the right to proper rehab. And again, we just couldn't get them to understand that this was a human rights case, and that a human being was being denied proper rehab and being condemned to a lesser quality of life for a lifetime because of people's fear and people's ignorance. Before Sharon and I were separated, I told you about a videotape we'd made, and remember, she picked up a glass on that videotape. You can see her take a drink of water. You can see her swallow with your own eyes. They say she lost her swallow reflex, so they fed her through a tube only the entire time we were separated, denying her the stimulation of taste that fires brain cells, that you must do in every way possible with a person with Sharon's type of injury. But worse than that, when I got back in to see Sharon, I could move every tooth in her mouth. They were loose from gum disease. She had a fungus growing on her tongue that was so thick I had to hold her tongue and scrape it daily. It took us years to keep that thrush from growing down through her digestive tract. When a speech therapist was asked how could this happen, she responded, lack of proper oral care. Sharon was moved closer to our home in June of 1989, and I was finally allowed to take Sharon out to events outside the nursing home as long as we had a staff escort. After a while, I was glad we had them because we had ready-made witnesses in court to testify how Sharon was so much more motivated on her outings than she was in the nursing home. They saw a completely different Sharon. I refiled the petition for guardianship, and I couldn't win even after the father withdrew and there was no other party of record. The medical team finally documented everything I could ever have wanted, and I can't tell you how difficult it was to sit through the numerous hearings, listening to all the medical testimony describing Sharon's regression, talking about the neglect, the negligence, the inappropriate medical care. I heard them say over and over again too much time had passed, and Sharon had lost opportunities for a lifetime. Yet in April of 1991, we received the appellate court decision once again, or the probate court decision once again denying me guardianship. It found that I had outed Sharon. Even though Sharon was willing to type out to anyone who asked her that she was gay. As Sharon had come out of her coma, I'd asked her, is it okay if I come out to fight for our rights? We're going to lose them if we don't. And she typed okay. And when I asked her, aren't I the most likely person you know to stand up and fight for gay rights? She typed least likely. I think she knew me pretty well. I feared I'd lose my job. I feared I'd lose my family's support. I feared I'd lose my friends. All the wrong things at that time. But anyway, yeah. So somehow, yes, I had outed Sharon. What I've learned, of course, is that our fear of coming out is worse than anything that can happen to us out. In the closet, I lost everything that was of value to me. The court found that taking Sharon out in public was putting her on display, was using her for a political cause, and was detrimental to her mentally, psychologically, and socially, in spite of all the medical testimony to the contrary. It found once again that Sharon couldn't understand or communicate, which was in total contradiction to all the medical testimony. It found Sharon needed to be institutionalized, despite unanimous professional testimony finding no need for her to be institutionalized. And I have a couple pictures here. This is Sharon being traumatized out in public. Okay, this is at the National Now Conference, which was here in California. It was in San Francisco. We got the Women of Courage Award. Here she is at a reception there. And we had staff escorts with us who testified in court, but somehow the judge says this is traumatizing for Sharon. All right. The judge found that I didn't understand the Iron Range mentality. The Iron Range is northern Minnesota, okay? And I don't understand any of these isms, racism, sexism, homophobia, heterosexism, etc., anywhere, and they're not just on the Iron Range in Minnesota. All right? The court went from fearing sexual abuse if, again, she came home with me to saying that I would be infidelity or adultery. So yes, we appealed. We got the appellate court decision December 17th, 1991, the first rational, logical decision by the court in Minnesota. That was exactly 12 years from the date we had exchanged rings. It overturned the lower court ruling, ordering that I be appointed guardian with full powers. It found the district court judge had not only made findings of fact that were not substantiated by the court record, but they were in total contradiction of the court record, and then used unheard of legal jargon. The judge abused his discretion. It's difficult to believe we spent over 8 years of our lives and over $200,000 to arrive at that 91 decision. The decision was a just decision, a right decision. The court finally found that Sharon, a woman, a lesbian, a person with a disability, she should have the right to be heard, to be allowed to see whoever she wanted to see, be allowed to go out in public wherever and whenever she chooses, be allowed to live in the least restrictive environment. Gee, I thought those were rights we already had. They did go a step further, and they found that Sharon and I are a family of affinity and that we ought to be accorded respect. Many thought the legal fight ended then, but actually guardianship comes out of the probate court, so it was remanded back to the probate court, and they were ordered to give me guardianship. And it took from December until May of 92 to get them to do that. All right, and then it took until August of 92 for them to give me letters of guardianship to act as guardian. I have no idea what they had vested in this case by then. Needless to say, the years before that ruling had been extremely difficult. It had been years since I had seen Sharon. I wasn't sure, no matter how hard I tried, that I would ever get to see Sharon again. I was traveling around the country speaking to break the case open, to fundraise, to pay my legal fees. It seemed like I might never get back in to see Sharon, or I might never get her home. It had been longer since the accident than we'd been together before the accident. I would never stop loving or fighting for Sharon, And as painful and overwhelming as the ordeal was, I came to the realization that somehow I had to move on with my life. I had to start living again. I made the decision to be open to other relationships. Sharon had taught me how to feel, to love, to live each day fully. I was very much a workaholic when I first met Sharon. Now I was losing everything that Sharon had taught me. I was wishing my life away from one court hearing to the next. The decision to move on with my life was a decision to somehow survive. I didn't want to go back to that person I was before I met Sharon. I needed to start healing. But anyone who would become involved with me would know that I'm a package deal. I would never quit loving Sharon, and I would never give up trying to bring her home. There were a number of women with whom I reconnected and felt close. They gave me support as our lives touched. I struggled with feelings of guilt that I was able to find happiness when I didn't know what Sharon was going through. One of the people I reconnected with during that time was Patty Bresser. She was a teacher and coach at St. Cloud State in 79 to 81 and knew both Sharon and me from that time. She returned to her home state of Connecticut in 81, but she still kept in touch. As our case garnered national attention, Patty followed it and gave press, sent cards, and called and gave us support. While I was fighting the legal system, Patty became a registered nurse and did graduate work at Yale University. So in the spring of 1990, Patty and I finally acknowledged we felt something for each other. But Sharon was still in an institution, and I needed to get her out. I wasn't sure where my relationship with Patty could lead. I still loved Sharon with every breath I took and in the depth of my being. But I also loved Patty. This was unfamiliar territory. There certainly were no role models for us, and yet I saw possibilities. The accident had changed Sharon's and my relationship, but it never changed the love we felt. Because of the court's interference, first by separating us and then dragging on the legal case, we didn't know the impact Sharon's brain injury would have on redefining our relationship. We hadn't been allowed to work through it. I certainly didn't know what Sharon wanted or needed from me, and only time would tell. I reached a conclusion. I asked Patty to move in with me and hopefully with Sharon when Sharon could come home, and she said yes. While we were reestablishing different types of routines and getting used to life under the same roof, we looked for ways for Sharon to come home. And as time got closer and closer for Sharon's move home, many members of my family expressed concern. They were afraid what it would do to Patty and me if Sharon came home to live with us. And to some degree, I was worried too. But even though my family calls her St. Patty, and we have a St. Patty's Day coming up where we're going to have a party for Patty, and she says there's no St. Karen or St. Sharon's Day, but Patty wanted Sharon to come home as much as I did, and she was as supportive and researched with me as hard as I did to try to find ways for Sharon to come home. We turned our attention from a legal system, all right, to a healthcare system. A system that would rather pay more money keeping people institutionalized than a lesser amount of money to enable them to live in a less restrictive environment. In order for people with disabilities to live outside of institutions, they need access to programs. Nobody's out there volunteering to get you the information. You don't know the programs exist, so you have to research to find them for yourselves. And most people with disabilities don't have advocates who are willing to go out there and try to find these programs. We finally found the CADI waiver. Community Alternatives for Disabled Individuals. It actually offered the same amount of money in programs and services as the traumatic brain injury waiver did, but it was flexible spending. Instead of just providing for like personal care attendant time, like the TBI waiver did, which was the same amount of money as this money over here, if we could use the money for adult daycare, it would go much further than paying for hourly wages of PCA time. It covered case management, it covered respite care, it covered adult daycare, personal care attendant time. So it seemed we found a program that we could put together and prove to the courts that Sharon's needs could be met outside of the nursing home, cheaper than what they were paying to keep her in the nursing home, so we invoked the CADI waiver. And at long last, it seemed possible for Sharon to come home. 9.5 years following Sharon's accident, after hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees and too many sleepless nights, what Sharon and I had asked for in 1984, the chance to get on with our lives, actually happened. Sharon was allowed to come home. Throughout the court proceedings, I heard people say Sharon's better off dead than living like that, so severely physically disabled. I heard she's better off a vegetable than a lesbian. A judge told me Sharon could not be cared for outside of the nursing home, and on this April 29th, not very long from now, Sharon will have been home for 20 years. I couldn't quite believe after all the years of heartache my chosen family was actually home together. A life we'd only dreamed about, of hope, of possibilities, of happiness was beginning. Sharon's move home marked a new beginning for us. Our lives are not the same as they were before. We've learned to live one day at a time, each day to the fullest. We live in this moment. That's the greatest gift Sharon has given us. She only has right now. She doesn't remember yesterday, and she has no concept or ability to sequence things and think about tomorrow. She lives now. This is the only moment Sharon has. And actually, it's the only moment any one of us is guaranteed. So we've learned to live this moment to the fullest. Sharon's fascinated with who I am now. She's interested in hearing me talk. Sometimes she goes with me and does workshops with me and things. But I will always be to Sharon the person I was prior to the accident. I'm stuck in time for Sharon. So she'll listen, and then we'll go back out and leave a room or whatever, and then she remembers me like I was. And I'm very different than I was before, too. And I really wish Sharon could get to know the person I am today. But sometimes I say I'm jealous, that Sharon can't remember things, and I wish I had short-term memory deficit. I had to live all 8 years with George W. Bush, and we'd talk about things with Sharon, and then she'd forget, so she didn't have to deal with it. So anyway, Sharon has developed a really unique connection with Patty. As I said, she knew Patty from before the accident, so Patty's in her long-term memory, and that's been really helpful. But they get along incredibly well and care about one another. Over the years, Sharon was described in the press as a quadriplegic, a poor disabled girl, the eerily silent daughter trapped in her twisted body, a poor kid lying there in diapers, needing to be turned every 2 hours. I want the world to know that none of those descriptions in any way accurately describe Sharon Kowalski. She's a sensitive, funny, loving, thoughtful woman. Too many people couldn't get past the reality of her disability. Where there were possibilities, they saw only limitations. She was patronized, humiliated, and treated as if she were totally invisible or totally incapable. It's long past time that people get to know Sharon Kowalski, and the pictures which I'll show you in a few moments give you some idea of who she is. The simple fact of her survival during all those years of the legal struggle is a testament to her strength of character. That she survived with her personality intact and sense of humor still amazes me. When I look at Sharon now, I can't help but notice what our separation cost her in terms of physical potential. There are times I can hardly keep from crying, but that's not what Sharon wants or needs from me. There are many things Sharon can do and so much improvement she's made since moving home. We concentrate on our life together now, on how much we still have. She's an incredible human being, and I can't imagine life without Sharon in it. She's adjusted to her new surroundings. Even though any move is difficult for a person with a traumatic brain injury, the change is difficult. It's wonderful watching Sharon learning to live again, interacting with other people. We attend potlucks, concerts, basketball games, volleyball matches, have friends over for dinner, play games, fish, travel, etc. 15 years after the accident, we got Sharon up in a standing frame, which changed her whole personality, being able to be at eye level with folks. 23 years after the accident, Sharon started to talk, something they said she'd never do. So meet Sharon. Some of our friends have children, and we like to have them over. Sharon loves children, and when they get cranky, we just send them home. Sharon has parties at our house, and if you notice the path behind, I paved the path down to the river so that we could get Sharon's wheelchair down there. If you've ever tried to wheel a wheelchair through a yard, you just give them whiplash, So anyway, we made it so Sharon could get out and about. Sharon likes to go fishing. She promised me a walleye. We caught a teeny tiny perch if you look carefully. It's about the size of some people's bait. Here's Sharon in her standing frame. Her feet are strapped in, her knees come up against the support, her hips against the support, and then she's strapped in around her, we call it a breast protector, and she can lean on that tray there. So here's Sharon, and that's Patty with her. As I said, it changed her whole personality. In inhibiting spastic movement in the lower part of the body, it also relaxed some of the spastic movement in her upper part of the body. When Sharon was hit from the left, most of the damage occurred to the right side of her brain, which controls the left side of her body. Sharon was right-handed. We did no tendon releases on the right hand and arm because we hoped that Sharon would be able to work out those contractures. And in addition to just typing on her speech synthesizer that you see there in her tray, once she started standing, she was able to get her elbow up off that tray, and we could hit that balloon back and forth 10 or 15 times, as long as I can leap over the coffee table and other things to get it. All right, but so now she has much more freedom of movement with her hand and arm. This was at the wedding ceremony in 1993, commitment ceremony at the National March on Washington. We believe love is all it takes to make a family, and this is our family today, Sharon, Patty, and me. For us, we use this definition of family: two or more persons who share resources, share responsibility for decisions, share values, goals, have commitments to one another over a period of time. The family is that climate that one comes home to. It's that network of sharing and commitments that most accurately describes a family unit, regardless of blood, adoption, or marriage. Sharon, Patty, and I continue to learn as we go along. There's no magic formula for living with a person with a disability, no how-to manuals on creating a family like ours and keeping it together. Let me share an example of what we just went through more recently. Sharon needed to go to the emergency room. We had a breathing emergency, and it was following a procedure. We'd had an endoscopy and colonoscopy that they had been asking for years, so we finally got Sharon ready to have that. And of course, while they were intubating Sharon, they cut her throat. And she aspirated blood into her lungs, and she wound up with aspiration pneumonia. So we go to the emergency room, all right, and then we're asked, what's your relationship? And we say we're a family. That's never an acceptable answer. All right, are you her mom? Suddenly I'm her mother. Sharon's a child, They just look at her and they treat her like a child. Or your sister? I said, no, I'm her guardian. And so they immediately asked for my guardianship papers. And then they want to know about who's Patty. All right, well, Patty has my power of attorney, I tell them. So if you can't reach me, reaching her is the same as reaching me. She can make any decisions on Sharon's behalf. So they asked for her power of attorney papers. We're not only asked in the emergency room where they scan them in, we're asked in x-ray, we're asked by the admissions nurse, we're asked by the doctor. Then when the doctor comes in to see Sharon, we have to produce our papers in all those places. Even though they scanned them into the computer, I guess it doesn't go with you to another floor. And again, we always respond that we're a family. But they always ask, exactly what that means. I have no objection for them asking for our papers. What frustrates me is, do they ask a spouse for their marriage license when they go to the hospital? Do they ask a parent for their custody papers or for their birth certificates when they go into the hospital with a child? Why is it they always ask us what our relationship is? And so, as I said, it gets pretty frustrating. But weeks after our experience, actually, the nurse manager called us in and wanted to know if we wanted to file a complaint. And we said, no, we're not about filing complaints. We just want people to learn. All right, and they let us make a training video, and now they're showing it in all their departmental trainings. So we're hopeful that other families won't have to go through some of the things that we go through. But so much of what we learn is through trial and error. Laughter and love have brought us through the rough spots, helped us to appreciate how fortunate we are, and we do have a wonderful life together. Sharon's just happier and healthier than she's ever been since the accident. So why do I share our story? I share it because it's the teachable moment. It crosses so many boundaries between women and men, between people with disabilities and people who are non-disabled, between people who are gay and people who are non-gay. It helps people to understand issues here at the emotional level, the heart level, not just in our heads. And I think if we can reach out and touch each other, break through those barriers that divide us, people can get it and can start to understand these issues. Our case also shows how powerful building coalitions could be amongst different groups. Women's groups, LGBT groups, disability rights groups work together with us. We must advocate and demand legislation which ensures equal rights for all people, regardless of color, regardless of disabilities, whether we're women, whether we're LGBT, whether we're people of all ages, sizes, religions, etc. I share our story because what happened to Sharon and me, the hell we lived through, should not have happened. We should have had the right to marry, and had we been married then, this case probably would never have happened. I would have had input into Sharon's medical care. Sharon would have been allowed to come home. But even when we do gain the right to marriage, as demonstrated by the Terry Schiavo case and other cases that have gone on, the press contacted me when this Terry Schiavo case was going on, and said, see, they're married, and the husband still has to go to court, even though he was legally appointed guardian and he was legally married. And I said, you've missed the point. The point is not whether or not even we could marry. The point is Terry Schiavo and Sharon Kowalski did not have advanced care planning done. They had no advanced health care directive. And had they had those, we would have heard of neither case. So we must go beyond thinking of marriage. Yes, I will always support people's right to marry, but you must do advanced care planning. All right, we need to build a record of what we would want if we were to experience an accident or illness where our competency is in question. The first line of protection is to come out. I use it in a much more general sense than just those of us who are gay. Gay or non-gay, come out for your protection, for the protection of those you love. Gay or non-gay, everybody must have these conversations with our loved ones. And I have a short video here of the National Healthcare Decisions Day, which is coming up in April, and we do hope it's going to work now. Aha, hopeful. If I could just get it. Here we go. Go right back. Oh, here we go. Okay. I always ask groups, how many of you are 18 or older? How many of you are in a relationship or not in a relationship? How many of you are gay or non-gay? How many of you have a health care directive? Oh, that's much better than usual. I'm glad to see that. Every single one of you needs to have one. Yeah, you want to leave it up to a judge to decide who's in your best interest? I certainly don't want to go there again. So what's advanced care planning? Just in case you didn't get it all in that little video, I'm going to run through a few slides here on it. Advanced care planning is the organized process of communication to help individuals understand, reflect upon, discuss goals for our future healthcare decisions in the context of our values and beliefs. When it's done well, it has the power to produce a written plan. Sometimes we call it a healthcare directive, or advanced directive, or a designation of a durable power of attorney, or a living will that accurately represents an individual's preferences and thoroughly prepares others to make healthcare decisions consistent with those preferences. Advanced care planning is about having conversations with our loved ones. We must have those conversations. It's about choosing someone to make medical decisions for you if you're unable to make them for yourself. And it needs to be someone you trust, someone you can talk with, someone you can discuss your values and goals. They must be willing to accept the responsibility, able to follow your wishes, able to make decisions in stressful situations. It's about the kind of medical care that you'd want if you had a severe brain injury and were unlikely to recover. It's about reflecting on religious, cultural, personal values that may influence your decisions and treatment. It's about having multiple conversations with people over a period of time. So it's more than just filling out a form. We need to talk about it. It's taking your time, not rushing through things. It's asking questions, being informed, thinking about living and quality of life issues, and it can include directions about death. When your plan's completed, you need to make copies for the person you've given your healthcare decision-making, whoever that's going to be, to other family members so everybody knows and understands. So in moments of trauma, we're not going to have these fights. Your physician, it needs to be part of your medical record. If you've ever been in a hospital, they have a record on you. Let them scan it into their computers. I can't stress enough how important advanced care planning is. It's so frustrating to me when we don't take advantage of every opportunity to educate our community of the need for advanced care planning. I know in Minnesota last November we had a ballot measure where they wanted to build, into our state constitution, one man, one woman for marriage, all right? We defeated that measure, which is a tremendous victory, but we spent countless hours and thousands of dollars to defeat the measure. And we still can't get married in Minnesota, and we didn't go the step further. What I wanted to do, I was willing to speak out at every opportunity for that. But I also wanted to end by saying, even if we gain marriage, we need to still do advanced care planning. And somehow they thought that that would distract from the message. So after all the time and energy we put into it, our community is still as unprotected today. We had all kinds of opportunity, all kinds of time with the press that we could have helped educate, not just our community, but our straight allies. We had something to offer everybody, and we didn't do it. We lost an opportunity that I thought was so important. So these cases like ours could still go on, all right, and needlessly, if people just knew and they understood how important advanced care planning is. Especially, we must think beyond same-sex marriage. That just can't be the end goal for our community. It's also necessary to be able to validate families, however they're constructed. Families change, families adapt with aging, with long-term illnesses, with disability issues. So again, we need to do some planning. Please don't leave yourselves vulnerable as Sharon and I left ourselves. A drunk driver saw to it that our lives would never be easy. The courts made our lives impossible. I have a 30-year celebration piece that was done with us. Yes, it's more than same-sex marriage. And I'd just like to play this 5-minute piece. They did this for us at St. Cloud State University, and I think it's a good way to kind of wrap up things, and then I'll just make a couple of concluding remarks. Sharon's favorite pose.
Every long journey is made of small steps, is made of the courage, the feeling you get when you know it is waiting, been waiting for you. The journey's the only thing you want to do. We cannot know what you go through or see through your eyes. We will surround you, the pride undisguised. In any direction, whatever you view, our love there with you. In every long journey, what drives you to go? It's half what you know and half what you don't. The secret's been waiting, your heart's got the key. The secret's the only thing you want to see. We cannot know what you go through or see through your eyes, but we will surround you, the pride undisguised. In any direction, whatever you view, you're taking our love there with you. Every long journey begins with a dream, a spirit with courage to make it all real. The dream has been calling to you. The dream is the only thing you want to do. We cannot know what you go through or see through your eyes, but we will surround you, the pride undisguised. In any direction, whatever you view, you're taking our love there with you. We cannot know what you go through or see through your eyes, but we will surround you, the pride undisguised. In any direction, whatever you view, you're taking our love, taking our love, taking our love there with you. How and when, who knows why, folks go searching for a long, long time. Someone to treasure, hold and miss. Oh, what they'd give for a love like this.
They planted a tree in our name in St. Cloud State.
No announcement, 'cause you never know. Hearts are open just enough, and so here is my most cherished gift, you and I, and a love like this. Oh, now it takes its time, I'm telling you. You don't choose love, love chooses you. If you only knew when to look, or how you try. If a word applies, it's gotta be inconvenient. That's the truth. Love won't come when you ask it to. It makes you crazy, it makes you risk everything for a love like this.
We must answer questions like, why couldn't Sharon Kowalski come home? It was past time to free Sharon Kowalski, and it's time to free all the other Sharon Kowalskis who are imprisoned one way or another by society's attitudinal barriers or by society's physical barriers. How much needless pain and agony must there be? How many broken, shattered lives are enough? It's time to free us all to be able to define our own identities, to define our own families, and to live free of fear. Thank you.